So we are so excited today to welcome Megan to the She Supply Chains podcast. So welcome, Megan.
Megan. Thanks. Happy to be here.
So we always start off just wanting to know a little bit about who you are personally and professionally.
Sure. I'm like a cat. I've had 9 lives. Professionally, professionally, I'm a COO at Sundays, Hedda, and Mo's Home Collection. Sounds like 3 companies, but it's 3 brands, all in furniture. 2 brands, Sundays and Hedda, are D2C, and Mo's is a B2B furniture brand. We're based in Vancouver. I haven't been in furniture my whole career, nor have I been in supply chain my whole career. I spent most of my career in fashion, largely on the product and strategy and business ops and merchandising side. So when I moved to furniture, I hopped over to supply chain. So I picked the really easy one to do supply chain in. I went to big and bulky. And yeah, and then, outside of work, I'm a mom. I got a 6-year-old daughter. So yeah.
That's awesome.
Okay, so I love we're gonna talk a little bit about too your work history because I think it's like fascinating. But
Yeah.
since you joined supply chain, um, and it's more of a recent join in your career history, has there been a moment where you're like, I really like it here. I think I might stay.
You know what? I love taking things that are disorganized and messy and organizing them. Like that's so
Welcome to supply chain. Yes.
exactly. My mom loves to tell this story, and I end up using it because it's very true. But I used to inventory my Halloween candy as a child. So I would I would empty out the bottom drawer of my dresser and then I would organize it all and put it in sections. And then I would create a checklist of inventory, mostly because my older sister and my mom would steal my Halloween candy and I wanted a way to hold them accountable. But I also just like to be really organized. And so I think that sort of, anyone who's in like supply chain or operations, like you kind of have to be that way. And I've been that way clearly since I was very little. My team knows like I'm always just like put it in a chart. Like that's just I want it in a chart and I want it organized. And so I think, there are times obviously like in supply chain it's all messy, like standing on the warehouse floor and like the dock is a mess. And I'm like, okay, can we just like put it in its place, put it in the lanes, like get it organized. I like that it's like visual, like they love
Mhm.
visual cues. They love a red, yellow, green sticker. My kind of place. And I like the challenge. So supply chain definitely keeps it challenging and interesting. Yeah.
I love it. Okay, so you're out in Vancouver, you meet somebody. How do you explain to him or her what it is that you do? Like what's your day look like?
My favorite way of describing it is I'm a cat herder. I just herd cats. There's actually, you know what? And I mentioned this to another COO of a different company, and he laughed. He's like, "Yeah, I use that analogy all the time." And I guess there was a Super Bowl commercial of like cowboys like herding cats. Uh, and he said it to me. I was like, yes. But it's basically, I mean, I think that's sort of what you kind of do. You have to take a bunch of sort of disparate little cats and you got to put them, like try and get them to herd in one direction. And I think it's a great way to describe, I think, sort of a COO or supply chain scope is you're herding everyone in one direction.
Right.
And that way it keeps it simple so that people like if they're kind of like, what do you do? I don't like they don't necessarily need to know or understand the ins and outs of like logistics or warehousing or customer care. But at the end of the day, sort of my goal is like, I'll obviously what I say is I joke, I start with I herd cats. But then really like ultimately I keep things efficient, organized, and ultimately for us, it's like delivering for our customer. So
Okay, so I love that it's like fashion to supply chain. I don't think we've ever had that. So, Megan, as you think about, you operate at the intersection of like high design aesthetics and then you said heavy logistics. I just
yeah.
got a couch a couple weeks ago and and it took forever to get here and it's lovely and huge. But in furniture, damaged or delayed sofa, it can really ruin the whole, room renovation or
Hmm.
plan, and how does your supply chain strategy differ when one, like myself, I'm like, I've been waiting 12 weeks. I'm excited for this to get here. So like the emotional stakes are high. It is a huge, huge, you know, um, piece of furniture. Um, And so, like, the stakes are really high. How do you think about your strategy versus something else and some of the things like Katie and I work on that are a lot smaller or, some of that dynamic being different?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting. It's different, or I mean, it's kind of similar. A little bit of different expectations on the B2B versus the D2C side. So I'll start with D2C. So on our Sundays and Hedda side, ultimately what stands us apart and where we saw really the opportunity as a business, one was not only to make really great, well priced product, but two is how do we really provide an exemplary service? Because you're right, like furniture, it's expensive, the stakes are high, but often the service is not great. Or you get to check
Mhm.
out and you're like, okay, I'm going to buy this $7,000 couch. And then they're like, yes. And it is going to be $500 extra for your white glove delivery. And so that is not a great experience. So what we do is we include white glove delivery with every
Mm,
purchase. So it's included. And so what that does is one, provide a better experience, but two, it also sets the customer up for higher expectations.
mhm,
And so, we really make sure that we work with higher end white glove delivery partners, and then we really partner with them on what is that service level, right? So, we've done carrier delivery training, so they have their own SLAs and what they expect as great service, but we also, provide our own expectations to them, in terms of what we think great service is. And so how do we make sure that every time we're providing a more consistent delivery experience?
I love though that you talked about this last mile delivery. It's almost I love that you're using your supply chain as part of a brand promise. And I think that's something that maybe everybody could learn from. Like, how is your supply chain actually enabling like the consumer experience, and are they having a great experience? So I love that. That feels like differential. Um, Coming back to Sundays, it was a brand that was founded by friends. It's scaling rapidly. You've come from more like established organizations, so you spent a lot of time at Aritzia, which I think is so cool.
Mhm.
So you know what like big can look like. As you've come into Sundays, what have you like? What are some of the common operations growing pains that maybe you've experienced as you guys have been trying to scale? And how are you like building the infrastructure there so that you can get to big, but also you can still have like this really, I don't know, it sounds like this lovely white glove service and everything works really well for the consumer.
Yeah. So, I mean, when I started at Aritzia, I mean, it was still big. It was 600 million, but I was with them on the journey from like 600 million to 2 billion. Right. And so
Okay.
there's a lot of stuff. And when I started Aritzia, like they were big, but they operated very small. So
Okay.
super entrepreneurially. And part of what my scope was to like, how do we actually build the systems and the infrastructure, the processes to help them scale and grow? Because what you can get away with when you're sub 1 billion is very different just based on like the size of your orders and all the
Mm-hmm.
things. And so it's sort of that same mindset, like, obviously much smaller because we're not there from a revenue size yet,
Yes, I love it.
yet, but we have big plans. But, you know, what you sort of start building with when you're a startup brand, and then what you need to get like as your revenue scales and grows, you kind of have to think about, okay, what are we going to do differently and how do we be more organized? I think some of it is legacy processes when you've started and you're not really like, what you know at the time. And then you
Mm-hmm.
kind of do, and a lot of what we started at Sundays, the way our processes were built and the way our systems were built was based off of the piggybacking of Mo's B2B. And on the Mo
mhm,
side, we sort of bent a lot of our processes like, well, if the customer asks us to do this, we'll do this. If this customer asks us to do, we'll do this. And so we were too flexible to what
mhm,
like the processes of our customers, which I think is a way to like, yes, service your customers and drive sales, but that also becomes a hindrance for how you can
Hmm.
actually be more efficient and effective. Because if you say yes to everything and all these different ways of working, you can actually process things efficiently and effectively. And
Yeah.
so it's sort of like stepping back, being like, okay, what works for B2B as a whole and our different segments of our B2B clients, like group them. So you're going to say yes to some things. You are going to have to say no and streamline and simplify. And then how does that translate in the D2C side? And I think the interesting thing is we thought a lot of things like, oh, well, we have to do this differently over here. And we made it a little bit too complex. And I was like, well, why did we do that? And why do we do this in this like overly designed way? Because we don't need to. So a lot of it is actually like stripping back and streamlining.
Mm,
And, I think that's the job of I think supply chain operations professionals. Like, how do you get from point A to point B in the straightest way possible? Right. And how do you get
right.
there cleanly, efficiently, effectively with less handoffs? And we have a lot of things that we do manually. right? And so we're trying to say, how do we can get faster, we can deliver for people better if we have less touches, right? So, and where we want to like figure out what are the things we want to say yes to and be flexible, but what are the
Hmm.
things we're actually going to be like, we shouldn't do this, we shouldn't do that. How do we really streamline? And then it's, a lot of it is systems process design, right? So we operate manually within our ERP or um even like booking freight, like how can we leverage AI? There's a lot of, AI
Yeah.
make things really exciting. So it's how do you just think through less handoffs, get more lean and efficient. That's going to set us up for like, if I know what like big looks like and the
Mhm.
way that I was in Aritzia, there actually were a lot of handoffs and touches. If I could design it again to scale cleaner, what would we
Yep.
do?
That's gonna be my question because I would imagine when you are growing, you wanna get the sale because you kinda need
Hmm.
that. So I was gonna ask, like, kind of if you do you think as people are building their businesses, is it try to optimize the efficiency later, or do you try to get in front of that? Do you know enough even at that moment to be able to do it? So that's why I was like, is that just have to be the path, or is there a better way?
I mean, I think you don't know what you don't know, but I think if you step back and say, okay, how do I want to design this like base case? I think part of it is
Mhm.
like, what is your customer journey and like, what does it look like?
Yeah.
And then if you step back and say, okay, I think this is the average customer, you're going to build it one way. I think I
Mm.
always like to operate from a place of like less touches, like, let's not do it manually if we don't have to. How do we just think through the steps of how we're going to get there? Because there's ways that you have to think like out of system and in system, right? And so in a
Mm,
lot of cases, if you operate like when you're small, you don't have a lot of systems. You probably have like one or two foundational ways of like systems of holding your inventory or whatever that might be.
Yeah.
And so you have to do things more manually. But then as you start to put in more foundational systems, I think you have to think through, okay, well, like if I could do this in a way that's more automated, what does that look like? But always have the ability, like I like to have the optionality.
mm,
Yeah.
And then, I learned this and the hard way, but like I think this is super important when you're thinking systems, always think configure, don't customize. And the more you
mm,
configure,
Yeah.
the less you customize, the
I like
easier it
that.
is to change things later. If you like, you have to do a really good job, I think, of like putting in your foundational systems. Because if you pick the right system and you configure it, it's easy to change because you're just like, okay, your IT team is going to be like, okay, we can change this, we can change that. If you customize it, guess what? You
Mm,
can't do system upgrades easily. System upgrades are, well, then you
Yes.
end up on an older legacy version and then anything you wanna do, it's super expensive. And then you create like, no business is so special, really, that you need
yeah.
all these customizations. Like, it's just not. Like, if you're in the business
What
of,
is
like,
that you say,
delivering
Megan?
yeah,
Everybody everybody's
like, everybody
special.
but it's true. Like, if you really peel it back, if you're in the business of, like, getting product to customers, there really isn't that unique of a way in doing it. You're allocating inventory to an order and you're shipping it. So, like, okay, what does that look like? There might be different ways of which that order is gonna come in, sure. Or there might be different configurations of how you wanna ship that product, okay, but ultimately, inventory like, sales order comes in, inventory gets allocated, it gets put somewhere, right? You're dropping it to a warehouse or a 3PL partner or whatever that looks like.
Yep.
So, I think, you know, if you just sort of think back like, "Okay, what is the flow of how we're gonna do things? What are the systems in which we need? And then how do we just think about like do it the simplest way possible to start? And if you have to do things manually out of system, okay, great, do it manually and then think about how do I automate that down the road, but don't customize your systems. That would be like my one advice.
I'm
Don't
gonna
overly
feel that.
customize. You are not
Configure,
special.
don't customize. Okay.
I think these are words to live by because I
Ah,
think
that's good.
we have all walked into roles or jobs where you're living with like the repercussions of the customization that was made however many years ago. So I think these are wise words that they are learned the hard way. But super, super
And
helpful.
that whole thing about the upgrades, oh,
Hmm.
I felt that.
Painful. Painful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna switch and talk about kinda integration mindset. So, looking at your time at Aritzia, you held unique titles like VP of Integration, VP of Product Strategy and Integration. In supply chain, we can sometimes be siloed away from marketing or e-commerce. So, can you explain your philosophy on integration, and how do you get a supply chain leader, a creative leader to kinda speak the same language?
Yeah, I mean, that title's a funky title. They called it integration, it was really business operations. So, but I mean, really the scope of it and a lot of it when I think about if I was when I was the VP of integration across product marketing and e-com, it was really like, how do we get all of those teams to create a general like go to market, like end-to-end process and way of working so that we're all moving, herding the cats, moving in one direction on one timeline to launch our product on time to customers in stores and online. Right. And so I think, creative people are a special breed. A lot of them are inherently allergic to process. And that's just, and it's okay. Like, the way I used to describe it, it's funny. I had a meeting with the CEO and founder of Aritzia one time. It was an update. And this was like an aha moment for me where he sat me down in a room and he took out a yellow piece of paper and he drew a bunch of dots on the page. And he's like, "What's your job?" And I was like, "Well, okay, random." And I was going to draw a circle around the dots. I was like, "Oh, I gotta put her," and I was like, "No, I drew a grid because my job is to put everything in a grid,
Mm.
right? I'm operations, I'm organized, I get it organized, I put it in a chart, I put it in a grid." And I think inherently, like business and operations people are grid thinkers, and creative people, and the dots is the analogy, like they're kind of dot thinkers. They're a little bit more esoteric. They're up here. They don't like organization. Or some of them do. That's just not fair to generalize, but I think they just think their brains think differently. But I think if you can get everyone aligned, like no one wants to be behind their deadlines.
Hmm.
I think everyone likes having a way of working and working
Mhm.
towards a common goal. And so I think you know, if you can get everyone being like, okay, we all agree, these are the steps we need to take. This is your timeline. This is your timeline. We come together at these points. Then it's seamless because if you have one source of truth, and in this case, when I was at Aritzia, it was like, the Bible, which was our product lifecycle calendar, which I built. Everyone's stuck to the Bible, right? Like we all know we're working towards this state. I need you to make sure you give me my stuff on time so that I can do my next part. But I think it's an easier way to get everyone aligned and working in the same direction if they're all working towards that common goal. And, in the operations world or integration, it's the timeline.
How did that go when you rolled that out initially? I'm curious.
Oh, that was fun. I will never the first design meeting was probably one of the most painful. Like it was myself and my colleague at the time stood in a room full of like 30 designers trying to explain to them, like, you're now gonna work on this timeline. That was really fun. But but I think the thing is we had buy-in from the very top. Like the CEO and
Hmm.
founder, Brian, like he believed in it and every executive was like, and that's key. Like you
Yeah.
need the sponsorship. Everyone has to be like, you're getting on the bus or like get off the bus. Right. There was no choice. Those meetings were painful. Like we spent the first year, half the meeting was talking about the process of the meeting. They were like 6-hour meetings. It was so long. It was brutal. But, we got there and it's still like the foundational piece of infrastructure today. Like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
talk to friends or colleagues like, "Oh, that calendar." I'm like, "Yeah, sorry." It still exists. And it's funny when I got to Sundays and Mo's, I said, "You guys, we don't actually have like they had a general timeline, but not really." And it was and for me, it was easy to develop. I'd spent like 8 years of my life running this thing. And fun fact, a furniture calendar and an apparel calendar, not that different. Like they're
Mhm.
really, so I say, like, you think you're special, you're not special. They're all kind of the same. Like
Yeah.
if
Mhm.
you're in the business of making and developing product, you might call the steps a little bit differently. The gap between them might be a little bit different, but
Yep.
it's generally the same. And the actual timeline is also very similar. It's a little bit longer, but not that different. And, it was the same thing, like, our PD team at Moe's, they're very like, they love process, so I was like, "Who are these unicorns?" It's fantastic. They love process and organization. And so, they got on board really quickly, and it was, pretty simple. It took, like, 1 season of growing pains to figure out the timelines,
Yeah.
but generally, everyone kind of got on board, pretty quickly.
I think that's important to hear because, depending on your company, and it's actually even really well established companies are still in early days of like doing things like PLM life cycles, S&OE
Mhm.
process, S&OP. And I think you think like, okay, here it is. It's all organized. We've laid it out. We're ready to go. But it's changed. And I look back and I think, like you said, it took like 6 months before you actually got to like maybe talk about the product life cycle rather than the meeting itself.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that feels about right. I don't know about you, Courtney, but
But
that
I
feels about
think
right.
even when we have those processes, it's like the governance and adherence to
Mm.
it that is the hardest to me. I'm like, I think it's even established companies with leadership changes and everything changing, it doesn't take much for things to,
Yep.
like anything else in our life, like, I do feel like governance is probably the hardest thing I see in organizations to, like, really stick to what we know works, even though we know it works, but it's painful sometimes, and everyone thinks we're different, and yeah, I don't know, I do feel like having good governance and change management is where things break down. Because I think most
Yeah.
people you can go Google half the process, they're out there, like, nobody they just don't wanna do
Again, it's
it.
not that special. I'm pretty sure you could come up with a calendar. And that's why, one of the things that I make sure we do is we measure it, right? So if we said this is what the timeline
Mhm.
was,
Mhm.
this is the original date, when did we actually do it? And were we on time or not on time?
Yeah.
And we scorecard it, right? And to say, like, okay, if we look back on the season, who was behind and who was not behind, and
Mhm.
did we launch on time? Like, what percent, the ultimate KPI is what percent of your products launch on time
Yeah.
Mhm.
of when they were supposed to. Now, you know, if you're hitting, like, it's never gonna be 100%, like, and no one who develops product assumes you're gonna launch 100% of your stuff on time. I think it's just natural some stuff falls behind. Our KPI was always, like, 80%, right? Like,
Yep.
80% is what we need is great, and I think that's probably a fair KPI. And so as long as we're at the 80, in the Aritzia world, that was we needed enough products, new products in stores to feel fresh. In Moe's, we have High Point Market, so you need a certain amount to, like, the floor needs to look fresh, and Sundays is a little bit different. It's just hitting our timeline of when we want to launch our products. But as long as you're measuring it and then sharing back those metrics to the team and then holding them accountable, that's how you can develop the change over time.
Love it. Okay, so speaking of metrics, you spent a lot of time as the vice president of merchandising planning. And you think about in today's economy right now, all kinds of things happening, inflation, tariffs, all the things. So inventory efficiency is really critical right now. Is there, as you like for people who are listening right now, is there something there, especially as you've come from like what I consider like maybe fast retail to high point retail, something
Mm.
there that you're always like, I'm always watching this from an inventory standpoint, whether it's a KPI, maybe it's a certain process you have in place, but something that you believe like everybody should like be have a pulse on this.
Yeah. I mean, number one, everyone at a leadership level in a product organization, like, you need to know what your top sellers are. If you don't know what's
Mhm.
driving your business, then you got problems, right? So everyone sort of needs to know and where you draw that line and what percent of your items are driving what percent of your business. Like, how exposed are you if one of those items or one of those programs goes off, where are your sales going to go?
Mm,
And so you just need to know what's your level of, like, what's driving your business, what's your level of risk, and then what's your rate of sale of these items, and what's your weeks of supply, right? And so are you over inventoried or are you under inventoried? Because you can look at, like, what's your percentage of total inventory to sales, and we used to look at this a lot at Aritzia, and it's kind of like, well, sure, like, your inventory turns, but a black legging is a black legging. If that's a core item, if you have too much one season, it's not gonna, like, that's fine because you're just gonna sell it next
next
season,
season.
and you never wanna sell out of a black legging. In furniture, it's a little bit different, right? Like, if you are over inventoried in something, which we have felt, like, the implications of being too over inventoried in a teeny tiny little black legging versus, I don't know, a 5-piece modular sofa is very different from a warehousing and inventory standpoint and the implications of that. And so, and how much additional inventory you're going to pad yourself for in furniture is obviously much different than what you're going to do in fashion apparel. But I think if base case, you have to know what your top styles are. You have to know what percent of your business is driven by what, whether that, and I think that's also from a product, but also, now on the B2B side from a customer standpoint, like, are you too over leveraged with specific customers? Because if their
Mm,
business goes off, you have a problem. And
Mm,
then, what's your general inventory in your top performing styles? And then conversely, how much inventory do you have in stuff that's not moving your business? Like, are
mm,
you holding on to inventory that you should be liquidating faster? Right. Because you can still, and I think there's, especially in retail, a lot of people are like, well, you don't want to have markdowns. I'm like, but if you like, you can still make money depending on your margins. If you
mhm,
mark it down 20%, it's going to move it faster. You still make money at 20% off.
mhm,
Right. You make slightly less money, but the implications of holding too much of that bad inventory hurt you further on down the road. So you have to
yeah.
think about what's performing, but also what's not performing, and clearing your, like, discontinuing it and getting rid of the stuff that's not driving your business, because that's just going to weigh you down.
I have
Yep.
2 random questions just about the
Ooh.
industry.
Yeah.
So, I just moved into a house, so Katie knows it's been a labor of love. Um, is the furniture business as, what's the word I wanna use? Not like finicky, but I mean, are there like from a we think about design, I mean, are there some things that are pretty like evergreen or like how is the business doing right now? And then second, have you seen customizations go up or down if we think about does it change with the economy or I'm just these are just my own curiosities.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I think the furniture business coming out of COVID, like post 2022, like the last couple years have been rough.
Yeah.
Just because everyone bought forward like
Yeah.
5 years of demand. So it was like amazing during COVID, and then everyone got stuck. Like everybody in the product based business, like I think fashion was the same, bought so much. And then all of a sudden the world opened up and people weren't spending on, you know, homes. They're not spending on clothes because they're
Mhm.
traveling because they weren't able to travel. In
Yeah.
Canada, it was like 2 years, US, it was less so. But, so I think it was pretty painful. On the D2C side, less painful just because you're one step closer to the customer and
Mhm.
B2B, you're one step removed, right? So if your customers are over inventoried,
Mm.
it's like you're further on down the chain. But I think now this year, I think has been, I think generally much better. But we have seen a lot of furniture companies, and furniture retailers go out of business. I think the business is changing quite a bit, just as there is more D2C. You don't need to go to that multi-brand retailer anymore. You're going to get it from the source.
Mhm.
So I think there's a lot of consolidation. And then in terms of customization, I think, it depends. Like if you go to Crate and Barrel West Elm, like yes, they have a couch and it comes in like 30 fabrics and you can pick that, but it's one base model, right?
Mhm.
And then it's just your fabrication that changes. They're not holding inventory in all of those fabrics. They probably pick their whatever it is, core four that sell. And then if you want to order this other one, it's going to take more time because they have to order the fabric, customize it for you, and made to order. I think that's like it's challenging. We dipped our toe in it a little bit with Sundays, and one, people didn't choose it, and two, those ones like it's so as a business, it's so challenging because say this person orders this customized couch, if they get in, like we have a policy 30-day returns. You don't like it, well, you customized it not for in terms of size, but in terms
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
color, like for you. Now I got to try and sell that. Like you canceled your order. Well, that's annoying. I don't the number of people that are gonna pick that one color and that one style is probably much less than what I know already drives my business. So I think from a scaling perspective, customization becomes really challenging. I think there are places where you can do it to offer optionality.
Mhm.
And I think that's what you see. Obviously on the designer side, designers love to do made to order furniture all over the place, and then they have vendors who do it. And that's just not the business that
Yes.
we're in.
Megan, do you
I'm
think
now
people
wondering though about
mhm.
colors that I have picked in the
Yeah.
past. I'm like, was it really that special, Katie? Or were you just picking one of the top 5 colors anyway? You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, do you think people have because I will say, uh, more leeway when it comes to furniture timelines where we're like, we can expect the 12 weeks, but you think that is that ever gonna change where people are like, "I'm not gonna wait 3 months for my bed or couch or whatever."
I mean, I think it depends. Like, for us I think what we see is we try and, have as much as we can before we publish it like on our
Mhm,
site in inventory, right? And we try to keep it so that your ETA on something, a new product, like we're not going to publish it until or show it to you until, it's maybe like
mhm,
4 weeks out, 2 weeks out. Um so we like to keep those ETAs within
mhm,
that sort of it's in stock. If it's a white glove delivery, you can get it within sort of 2 to 4 weeks if it's close to our warehouse. And maybe that's going to stretch to 3 to 5 weeks if it's a little bit further away. Or a reorder on something. Maybe it's 3 months because we sold out and we just have to order
mhm.
it from the factory. And in furniture, you don't have the option to air it in, right? Like you can't be like, okay, I sold out, it overperformed, and now I'm going to put it on a plane. Like that's the lever you can pull in small parcel, right? Like no problem. I'm going to air in 25% of my reorder. That'll get me 4 weeks of sales, and then the rest can come on a boat. Like, no, it's all coming on a boat.
Mhm,
So, if we sell out of something, the lead time is going to be longer. I think what we see and what I see is customers just want you to hit the delivery promise that you give them.
yeah,
So if
Mhm.
we give you a window of like it's going to come between this date and this date, our job is just to hit the date that we
mhm.
promised as to
Okay.
the best of our
Yeah,
ability. A lot of stuff happens in big and bulky deliveries, and getting product from point A to point B. But my job, and I feel like I'm being successful, is if I have a high percentage of my orders hitting that original ETA.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So we're gonna jump over to talk about teams. So you've been recognized for building empowered, high-performing teams. Supply chain and ops can often be high burnout roles, especially we all have our peak seasons. So how do you structure your team to ensure they remain resilient and creative rather than just like we all get into that kind of firefighter mode?
Yeah, I mean, I think I like to sort of set the standard. I think there are people who like leaning in and running into the burning building, which is a lot of times supply chain, and people who don't. And I would say, like, generally, if you don't like running into the burning building, potentially supply chain is not for you. Just because I think it takes a certain grit and resilience to be successful in these jobs. And again, it's like, is this the thing that I want to do? Like, do I want to work in a warehouse? Do I want to move big and bulky furniture? Do I want to be in charge of people moving big and bulky furniture? Is that something that I enjoy doing? Do I love dealing with customers and customer escalations? It's not fun dealing with customers yelling at you all the time in customer care. But, some people look at it as, they like the challenge, they like helping people,
Hmm.
and logistics. Do I like solving the puzzle of trying to get things from point A to point B on time? So I think like I like to screen for, do you have the resiliency and do you like leaning in general? Because you can't teach a high performing mindset. Like,
Mhm.
I think you either have it or you don't. It's just like the grid thinker or the dot thinker. Like, are you a grid thinker? Because if you're not a grid thinker, supply chain is not for you, right? And that's fine. Like, there are plenty of other jobs. I think it's just like, is the team fit for the role and the
Mhm.
expectation? And then, I always just sort of say like, good enough isn't good enough. Like, we want to how do we deliver excellence every day? And then, naturally, we do have those peak times. We're dealing with it right now with my team, post Black Friday.
Mhm.
Everyone's burned out. We had heavy inbound, we had heavy outbound. There's a lot of customers calling, lots of volume. And how do you just sort of like take the moment to recognize that it's stressful? I think a lot of
Mhm.
times people just want to feel heard. It's like, hey
Hmm.
guys, I know it has been tough. And let's take a moment to recognize that. And then also, how do we plan for, we expect the volume to go down. So, like, make sure we're taking our vacations, make sure you're taking, if you need just like a day, take the day, like a vacation day, just to reset. If you've been working nonstop and mentally reset yourself. And I think a lot of that, just recognizing as a leader that your team could be feeling that way instead of continuing to push, is how
Mhm.
I manage it. So, like, I like to know and be aware of where my teams are so you can help meet the individual where they are.
Yeah.
I like that.
All right. So, last question. I think it is so cool that as part of your role of running supply chain, you're the COO, which is pretty badass, right? So, as we have listeners who are thinking about like, what could that career path look like for me beyond operations? What are some of those other skills that they should be thinking about developing if they aspire to be a COO?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I think like I said, I'm the cat who has 9 lives. I think variety in your background. Like,
Mm.
I've done fashion. I started as an assistant buyer, and then, I wound up in China. I started my own business. Then I wound up in like oil and gas consulting, not related to supply chain or operations at all. Like writing root cause analysis for like engineers out in the field, and then, did my MBA, wound up back in fashion, and did a lot of different things within my scope at Aritzia. So I think having exposure and variety to like a lot of different areas of the business, I think is helpful. And honestly, like you don't have to pick different industries, but I think what's helped make me be effective is you can throw me in anywhere and I will be able to figure it out. Because I think over time, all these different experiences have helped me build the skill of like, how do you just like strip it back? And again,
Mhm.
get it from point A to point B and be efficient and effective. And I think if you flex that muscle in enough different situations, it helps you figure out how can you help troubleshoot different areas of the business, because every COO role also is not the same, right? It depends
Hmm.
on the business that you're
Mhm.
in. So the COO scope for me is very supply chain and business process focused. Other companies, it could be more like HR, IT,
Mhm.
finance, right? And other companies, it could not be at all. It could just be sort of like the right hand of the CEO who
Mhm.
maybe is more creative, and then you just run everything in the business. I think, having a business mindset, so spending time in merch planning, I think was very helpful for me because I understand like the levers of what drives a business. And then, even that oil and gas consulting work, like it taught me change management. It taught me being able to work
Mhm.
in like something completely different. And then, starting my own business in China, also like I had to do everything soup to nuts in a different language. So I
Mm.
think being nimble, being flexible, and then being able to adapt and then having variety in your background, but it all has to be anchored again, I think by like, you know, the red thread that I think that goes through my story is like, again, it's like getting from point A to point B efficiently and effectively and figuring out what is that thing that's going to drive the business and being able to pull that through and get everyone unified and aligned to that. I
I
don't know
think
if
that's
that's a good answer,
I
but
think it's a
I
great
think it's great.
answer because I think sometimes you're in roles and at the time you're like, why the heck am I doing this? And every
yeah.
single role you have is preparing you for something else. It might not be the next one, it might be 2 or 3 down the road, but think about the multitude of skill sets, then competencies that you built over this really varied career. And you could do it at one company or you could do it across multiple or
Yeah.
multiple industries. But I love that. Like dig in, really learn it, understand like what's driving this particular area, and then how can I help it get better.
The thing
Yeah.
I like that I think Katie and I'm jealous sometimes about, like, people's diversity of background. But I do think, I love how and I'm just from what you told us and our meeting you, like, not have like, having the courage to just jump around and try things and put yourself out there, and to Katie's point, you never know how it's all gonna build to where you are today and the skill sets you need. So I think it's very easy, I think for me and probably Katie coming out of engineering school, you can get on this, like, very prescriptive path, and
Mm.
then I think I wish now when I was younger, I probably did more outside of, like, the path than, now I'm like, it's too
It's
hard.
never too late. It's never
Oh
too
my god.
late. It's never too late.
We'll see.
I
But
don't
I
know.
think
I
that
mean, I say that. Like, I mean, I took a leap. I left
yeah, that's
my
true.
fashion role and I just was like, I didn't
It's
know
not
what I
too
was
late
gonna
for us,
do and I
Katie.
wound up in furniture.
But now
So
we
it's
have a
not too
supply chain
late
podcast, so we can't go too far.
within supply chain. But yeah.
Oh, this has been so good, Megan. It's been so great to meet you, and thank you, Katie, for making that connection. So it's
But
been
awesome.
I've
Thank you,
learned a lot.
Megan.
This was so fun,
Configure, do not
guys.
customize. We're gonna put that
Yeah.
in the that I'm not
Mhm.
supposed to know.
Gonna make it on a mug.
Yes,
Or you are
yeah,
not
right.
special. Like you are not special.
You're not special.